Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art to Life podcast. Super excited to dive in today to a dear friend, Arthur Drooker. He's a Bay Area photographer. And I love these episodes when I know the person so well because it's like we get to just catch up and also do a podcast. So Arthur, welcome so much for being here. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So I know your whole world, and then I went to your website this morning and I was looking because Arthur does these amazing photography books. The books he chooses subject matter and then he does these books. That's how he does the projects. And so it's really, really cool. And so I went there this morning before you came here, like 10 minutes before, and I was looking at all the books to refresh my memory because I've got my favorites, some of which we'll be diving in today. And I went to the About section and there wasn't a lot there because I think Arthur's like most of us, you know, the art, it's about the art. It's not about the artist, right? And so then I thought, oh my God, this is perfect. We're going to talk about you and how you got here, how you make this, because that's the mystery part. I don't totally know the whole backstory. So again, why don't we just dive in with you know, how you came into photography and then we'll figure that out, because you do a particular kind of photography in a particular kind of form, which I absolutely love, and I want to understand why you do it.
Well, let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
It started when I was about 15 years old.
Uh-huh.
I grew up in New York, in the Bronx,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad, he made photographs, but usually family type stuff.
Uh-huh.
But he had some, looking back on it, he had some pretty sophisticated cameras. He had a Minolta 2x2 and, you know, with a bellows and the whole thing. And I was like, you know, looking back on it, I was like, wow, Dad, you know. But one day he gave me a little camera called a Kodak Retina, which I remember correctly, he got from an army buddy in World War II. And it was a little camera like this.
Uh-huh.
And it conveniently fit into a jean jacket pocket.
Oh my God.
So this was going back to about 1969.
But it's not a disposable, right?
No,
I'm
no,
thinking
no,
of disposable.
no,
This is
definitely
like
not.
a mini product.
This is a,
wow.
Yeah, it was a small Kodak Retina, fit in my jean jacket pocket, as I mentioned, and it was all manual, nothing automatic about it. You had to set the f-stop, the shutter speed, the ASA, the whole thing. And this was, you know, back in the analog days, shooting film. And I would typically shoot slides, Kodachrome 25, which doesn't even exist.
No, that's my dad used to shoot that.
Yeah, it was
so
just
cool.
these beautiful warm colors.
It's
you know, there's a reason why Paul
beautiful,
Simon wrote the song, right?
Yeah, that warm color.
Yeah. And so that's how I learned. I was self-taught. I would literally, there were instructions that came with the Kodachrome 25 about, on a sunny day, shoot f11 or 16 at 1/25th of a second.
Oh
and
my God.
I cut that out and Scotch taped it to the back of the camera. And,
wow.
And I just started exploring my neighborhood in the Bronx. Anything that caught my eye. And for a 15-year-old kid, who, you know, didn't have much agency in the world, this was very empowering. That I could put 4 borders around anything that to me was a picture. And it was a great feeling. It was a real deep feeling of, okay, this feels really good. And at the same time, there were a lot of kids in my neighborhood, guys, boys, who, that was around the time they were getting into the guitar. So it was just interesting because I've always called the camera my guitar.
That
you know,
thing that
and when
you
I make a
could
photograph that really works for me, I say it sings. It's like music. There's like a musical thing there. There's a rhythm. There's something musical that I feel, and maybe I even hear, even though it's obviously a visual medium.
And then so that was like 16? I mean,
I was like around 15. That would have been 1969.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because when I don't, you know, I like to think that like, well, I made art because I've always been an artist and I just wanted to do that. But I remember getting the feedback in high school, like when I was 16, that that was something people talked about for me,
About
like
you.
that I was
Yes.
I did this thing that to me I'd always drawn. I mean, my dad drew, I drew, we always drew. It wasn't anything special,
Right.
but kind of like when you get that old, it is special, and then you kind of need it at that time. At least I did, like this separates me. I wasn't really good at sports. I was not a very good student. In fact, that was the only thing I could do was do art well. And it became my thing, like the
Yes.
guitar or and I
Yeah.
think I think that, so was that for you? It was like your like
It was photography.
identity,
Well, it's
at
a
that
good,
age?
yeah. It was photography and filmmaking, because around that time,
Oh,
Super
cool.
8 film was a big thing too, and Kodak, they made these Super 8 cassettes.
It's like they were so innovative and they just became a dinosaur.
I
But
kn-
at that time, you're right, Super 8 was like, what?
Yes.
We can make movies ourselves?
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember
so
that.
you had that Super 8 cassette,
Uh-huh.
and you stuck it in a Super 8 camera. And I remember there were a couple of kids in my neighborhood that used to make Super 8 movies, and loved it. So I fancied myself a filmmaker at that time more than a photographer.
Oh, interesting.
And when I was in high school, I had aspirations to become a film director. But I was always interested in photography, and I was fortunate enough that one of my friends at that time was a kid named Misha Irwit, who was the son of Elliot Irwit, who was a famous photographer who passed away, I think, earlier this year. But he was a famous photographer, a Magnum photographer. He was a colleague of Henri Cartier-Bresson,
Wow.
the Capra brothers. I mean, that was pretty heady stuff. And I remember one time, Misha took me and a friend down to his dad's apartment. He and his mom were divorced. So we went down to his dad's apartment on Central Park West in New York. And that was an eye-opener for me, because his dad was like no other dad that I was around. My dad was a salesman. Other dads in the neighborhood where I grew up in the Bronx, they were salesmen or accountants or doctors, that kind of thing. But Elliot Irwit, he was a photographer, he was an artist, he was even somewhat of a bohemian, and he was very successful. And I took, he was a very cool guy, and his apartment on Central Park West, and a seed was planted that, there's another way to be, there's another way to go. You can make something happen here. And as I got older, it became more of a thing. Like, I used to joke about it. Like, I went down to Elliot's apartment, and I used to kind of make a joke about it in a way. But then as I got older, it's like, wait a minute, there's something serious going on here. It's like this time release. That as I got older, it's like, wait a minute, you can make it as a photographer, as an artist, as someone in a creative field. It can be done.
Yeah. Because your dad wouldn't have known about that, or
no, my dad encouraged me to a certain extent, and my mom was one of those, keep it as a hobby parent.
Yeah, right. Right.
Have fun now, but
Right.
go into some kind of profession, which might have been,
Was there an image
Jewish thing
of
or
this?
something,
What
but-
was his name again?
Elliot Irwit.
Elliot Irwit. I
Yeah.
can't picture it. Is there one image of yours? Like, what were were there pivotal photographs that you saw that you were like, okay, well, this is a whole nother level? I mean, do you have those?
Well, Elliot Irwit was very well known for a certain kind of sensibility. He had a sense of humor that was subtle, and it came out visually. And like, he loved to photograph dogs, for example. But he photographed dogs in a way that made them very human.
Oh, interesting.
And he was a street photographer, so he had this knack, this skill, this talent for just capturing these moments that were like, man,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, which is
no
kinda
more
what-
calls, we have a winner.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's like,
That's so cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, years later, when I did the book Conventional Wisdom, my book about unusual conventions.
Yeah. So you guys, this book, it's crazy. Go into this a little bit and then keep going, because this is really cool.
So this goes back to about 2013 through 2015. I spent, over the course of a 3-year period, attending these very unusual conventions, to say the least. This was, fetishists, Lincoln presenters, clowns, mermaids, historical reenactors.
This is like all the people that want to be a mermaid, you guys.
Yeah.
Go and have a convention, and they're all mermaids, and they're all there. This is happening every year, all kind.
Yeah.
The Lincoln one, they all dress up as Abe Lincoln, and there's like 500 people there as Abe Lincoln. But Arthur went and photographed these, and then he has a whole book of it, which is just. And I gotta say, you do have this humor thing. It's super dry, but it's in your work.
I have to say, some of that, I have to say, was influenced to some extent by Elliott Erwitt. And one of my best moments as a photographer was he saw the book, Conventional Wisdom.
No way.
He saw it, and because I'm also friends with his daughter, Ellen. And Ellen was kind enough to show Elliott a copy of the book. And he really liked it, which was so coming full circle for me.
Wow, that is so great.
Because when I was doing the photography, when I was on these locations at these different conventions, he was like my creative North Star. Like, when you go into these conventions, and these are people with very specific, unusual interests, and it's very easy to make fun of them. And that's not what I was looking to do.
Yeah, this judgment brain comes in.
Correct.
I mean, even the way I described it, it's kind of like I'm putting these people down.
Well, they are unusual, and they would be the first ones to say that.
Right, but it's so cool, right, that actually people self-organize.
Right, self-organize.
Over something, and it's just as good as anything else.
Yes, but I realized, I knew intellectually going into it what the book was really about. But when I would be attending these conventions, it was viscerally reinforced that the real burning heart of the book is about belonging. Like, everybody finds their community, no matter how unusual it might appear.
That's beautiful. Absolutely, of course.
So that was, I led with that, and the organizers of these different conventions, they really got that was where I was coming from. And that I was not about ridicule or any of that.
Yeah, it's not a freak show.
I would have no interest in doing that, quite frankly.
Right.
So to me, it was almost like being a visual anthropologist.
Oh, yeah.
Attending these community gatherings, basically. But from a creative standpoint, Elliott Erwitt was my somewhat of a creative North Star, photographic inspiration, because he had a very gentle sense of humor. And I wanted to imbue the work with a sense of humor as well, when appropriate.
Yeah.
And again, the gratifying moment was when Elliott saw the book and expressed how much he liked it, to the point where he wanted to do a signed book exchange with me.
Oh my God.
So,
that is so great.
In my so-called life as a photographer, that was, it doesn't get better than that.
No, that's so great.
So, yeah.
Did you have any, I'm curious about going into those environments where everyone was dressed up as Santa Claus and Abe Lincoln, so did you start that project thinking about, okay, well, this is all about belonging, or did you go in and then just realize, you know what, this is like, these people are just wanting to be together because...
So I'm getting a chill as you're asking me the question.
Because it's beautiful, and I don't know if you told people about what that was, their first hit, it's always the meaning underneath the meaning. It's always... This is why we do what we do.
Right.
What essential need is this peculiar behavior answering? And it's belonging and community. But
and also,
how did that show up, and how did you taste it and notice it?
Well, once, as I mentioned a moment ago, going into it, I grasped intellectually, shall we say, that this would be about community. But again, once you're at these different conventions, which are basically ballrooms in hotels with the crazy carpeting and all that kind of stuff, then you really experience. I remember I went to the furry convention, which was furries. These are people who dress up like furry animals, almost like mascots, for college football teams or what have you. But they're not, strictly speaking, mascots, but they look like that, dressed up as tigers and bears, and sometimes they dress up as hybrid animals where they have the wings of a bird, but they're just like a polar bear at the same time.
Oh my God.
But these are all about their personas. These are all about their alter egos. There's a whole psychology associated with this kind of thing. But getting back to the theme of belonging, the furries have a certain kind of reputation outside of their world, which is kind of negative, just to, not to put too fine a point on it. And they're kind of understandably defensive and protective about that. They kind of feel that they're not understood. And so when I contacted the convention organizers, I told them where I was coming from, and they could feel I was being sincere, and they invited me. And when I was there at the convention, as I was at all the conventions, but with the furry convention, it was a little more intense because of A, how they're perceived outside their community, and B, you get the sense at these conventions to varying degrees that this is the highlight of their year, where they all come together.
For sure, yeah.
And with the furries, I have to say, as I've described it, you can feel the heat in the room, the energy of their togetherness. It's not just because they're wearing these furry costumes that are kind of hot to begin with in terms of how it feels temperature-wise, but just the energy and the joy of coming together. There's no judgment. We're here because we love being together. And
God,
and the wild thing was, they're all dressed up as furries, or at other conventions, they're dressed up as Santa Claus, or dressed up as mermaids. I'm the guy dressed up like this, so I'm the odd person out.
Yeah,
you know what
right.
I mean?
You're being like othered,
But they made me feel like I was part of their community, which was great. And there was also, I have to say, something very fearless about who they are and what they're doing that I truly admired in a very deep level.
Yeah.
To be that, in a larger context, non-conforming in whatever way you want to interpret that.
Yeah.
And yet you don't care. This is who I am. This is how I'm expressing myself. If you can't handle it, it's really your problem. And they're right. It's your problem.
Yeah.
But when they all come together, and at the furry convention, you are talking about upwards of 500 people.
Wow.
And then you hear some of their stories. Some of them are heartbreaking, and that these communities are lifesavers in some cases.
For sure.
I mean, I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah.
They are lifesavers. So when you hear that and see it, and you sense the camaraderie, it would be dereliction of duty on my part as a photographer and as a human being not to capture that visually.
Yeah.
To ridicule that is just so abhorrent.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
And we have these different parts of ourselves. I'm thinking of, actors and, musicians and people that, you get this in coaching where, give that bolder, more powerful part of yourself an identity, a name, and then name that and then become that to do the thing that you're not normally comfortable doing. And they're just the located aspects of themselves. They want to be this way, and that's scary to do it alone. And then they're all coming together.
Right.
And
Exactly.
we all have these parts, and that's what self-expression is. It's just about, leaning into the corners of ourselves and bringing more of ourselves out, but as, which is scary, and it just, that's the pursuit. How self-expressed can we become?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I realized after attending these different conventions that I have my own communities too, whether it be in photography, or even, quite frankly, as being a Boston Red Sox fan. That is a community too.
Uh-huh.
You know, it's a little different. It's more socially acceptable, perhaps, than being a furry or some other unusual kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's honestly, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
It's a sense of community, a sense of belonging. It's a shared thing. You just know.
Yeah.
You just know.
So, you know, and so this was just like this little chapter for
Yes.
you, and you literally, no pun intended, made a book about it. But you're out in the world, and you're this autobiographical. I mean, you're archaeological.
It's an anthropological observer.
Anthropological observer, and you're going on to these things. Are you looking for community yourself, out by yourself?
You know, that's a great question.
You know,
Maybe
like what is the,
Dr. Wilton.
I mean, no, but when I take pictures, the pictures I notice that I love is when I forget where it was. This just came to me. I haven't thought of this forever, but it was like either a interview with Irving Penn or Richard Avedon or some photographer, and he was talking about the moment of humanity that you capture sometimes. And I don't even remember, I can't even believe I'm recalling this, but there was something about, he was saying, I was photographing this woman, she was walking on the street, and she was carrying all these bags, and she was eating something, and it was a very like fashionable woman, and she threw something away, and he was filming it or caught it. And then after she threw it away, then her hand, she went like this again to get the dirtiness off from touching. It was this motion, and he said it was so human and it was so beautiful, and it was better described. But I just thought, I love that. I love that. I love seeing the humanity in people. And it's like, I don't know, and that's what you're seeking, that maybe, I'm not sure.
Well, it's certainly in conventional wisdom, I was seeking a certain kind of humanity or expression of humanity, again, the community theme. And then, to be honest, I don't photograph people that much because I'm kind of shy about it, but the other book I did that certainly had to do with people was Pie Town Revisited, which was this really small community in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. And that was bringing together my interest in history, documentary photography, and what became of a place. But that was also dealing with a community too, and photographing people. But that was a different kind of thing than conventional wisdom. But you're trying to photographing people, making portraits of people, you definitely. I always feel that when you're photographing people, it's also a self-portrait, because you're really photographing your connection with the person you're photographing, whatever that connection is. And with the people of Pie Town, which is a community of the immediate community, maybe 60 people. The outer community, maybe 125 people. This is like literally in the middle of nowhere in southwest central New Mexico.
Did you just like drive through this?
No,
town?
What happened was, this is the history buff side of me. Again, when I was 15, just getting interested in photography, that's when I first saw those black and white photographs that were made during the Depression. The FSA, Farm Security Administration photographs that were made by Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans. Well, when I was like, again, 15, 16, 17, and I saw those photographs for the first time, that really made a profound impact on me.
Yes.
Just that they were great photographs. They were made in the US. And this was, now I'm looking at these photographs as a teenager in the late 60s, early 70s. And these photographs were made like 30, 35 years before then, and how different the world seemed to have changed since the Great Depression to when I was 17 years old. I mean, my parents lived through the times that those people lived through. My parents grew up in Boston. But in terms of, they were contemporaries living in America at the same time. And this just blew me away, But then, as a burgeoning, blooming photographer, again, the fact that they were photographers traveling around photographing, again, that seed was planted about you know, you can make a life of this somehow.
I mean, it's
You
so
know?
cool because I don't really even draw. And by the way, I don't know if you realize this. I like to paint and talk. So
Yes.
please don't feel
No,
like when I'm looking down, I've listened and I love seeing.
I like what you're doing.
Yeah,
So
it
if I have
feels
anything to
the
do with that, that's
conversation
good.
of carnival is like, oh my God, this
Yeah.
is so weird. These colors are so weird. And that's what I love about it. But I think what we're talking about is just presence, right? You just show up in a room, and if you're present and you feel things and you can notice things, there's tremendous value in that, and document it, and then other people can see it. I mean, everyone listening today is learning something about themselves probably, or about community, or, and I think when we're present and we're just ourselves and we're wandering and looking, that's when all the amazing things happen, in the art and all the rest of it.
Yes, I completely agree. But I have to say, as a photographer, but I think it applies actually to any visual art, but I know photography best, so I can speak with, some sense of authority.
Yeah, right.
But, the thing is, when you're a photographer, it's kind of a solitary sport,
Yeah.
And the other thing too is when you're present, whether it's a convention or a little community in New Mexico, or photographing a building, because I also like to photograph architecture.
Right.
You are present, but you're also observing. So you kind of have one foot in, one foot out, to mix the metaphor a little bit, because you're really looking for things in a very specific way. You are observing. It requires a certain conscious level of observing, which is being present in a way, but it's not being present in another way. Like, for example, at the conventions, because we've been talking about it, I was looking for certain moments that just expressed something. So I'm on the prowl for that kind of moment.
Yeah.
And
you don't know what it is.
you don't know what it is until you literally see it. And the thing is, because you are observing on that level, it keeps you in some ways from fully engaging with what's going on.
It's like if you're going to go film a, dance concert or whatever, you can't be just full blown dancing and listening to the music, because you're trying to also capture the thing. Yeah,
correct.
I totally see that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I found that, when I attended these conventions, or, when I was in Pie Town, what I would do is I would also interview people, because I also wrote the text for the books too.
Okay.
And I find that when you're observing as a writer, that's a little different than when you're observing as a visual person, as a photographer, as an artist.
Because you're not trying to capture, you're just trying to get a feeling, and then you can reflect and
right. It's a different level of engagement. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're just different because of the tasks that you have to accomplish.
Yeah.
So, so on one level, as a photographer attending these conventions, you are so present. It's this almost hyper state.
Yeah.
But on another level, you're almost oblivious to certain things, because it doesn't pertain to what you need to be doing.
Yes. Totally. And you don't know coming in exactly. I mean, do you have a sense of what you're chasing, what you're after, whether it's a building or a person, or
yes, well,
if somebody said, "Why do you shoot what you shoot?" What would you say? Because I was looking at it, and I think I kind of understand. I mean, but you've got the beautiful Twilight book, which is, you guys, it's this amazing book. It's your pretty recent one.
Yes.
Sky sunsets, photographed from basically the same place in Sea Ranch, California. Just epic sky, and they're like Mark Rothko paintings. I mean, just the colors. They're not like sunsets. I didn't even want to use that word because it doesn't.
Well, it truly is Twilight.
They're color field images. They're not sunsets, although they're made at sunset. But so it doesn't feel like, oh, it's a picture of a sunset. They're color field paintings, is how I like to think of them.
I shot those in soft focus to get that effect.
Yeah. But so you're shooting that, and then you got a book about City Hall, and then you've got this book you were describing about conventions, right? And then your most recent book coming out is 36 Views of the Golden Gate Bridge, which is amazing. But so what is I mean, you're the common denominator, but what do you think? I mean, what do you?
No, it's a great question.
And maybe you don't actually have to know. You just make the work. But
I mean, to me, the easiest answer I can come up with, which I think is the best answer, is I really pursue my curiosity. It's literally whatever catches my eye. And there are a lot of photographers who really specialize in one thing, whether it's street photography, portrait photography, landscape photography. And, God bless them. I'm just too creatively restless that way.
Yeah.
So I really pursue what catches my eye. And it depends on what we're talking about as to why something may have caught my eye. I mean, for city halls, for example, we live in the Bay Area. One day I was just curious about San Francisco City Hall. It's a beautiful building.
Yeah.
So one day I was passing by on Van Ness and I decided, the hell with it. I'm just going to park my car and walk inside. Have you ever been inside San Francisco?
No.
I have to tell you something. I gasped.
Really?
I gasped. The rotunda of that building, and you look up, it's extraordinary. Huh. There's just no words, and it's a city hall.
Yeah, right.
So that was the spark. And then, long story short, that led to a book about city halls. But San Francisco City Hall was truly the inspiration. And then I decided, well, what other city halls are out there? I have a book agent, and she's been terrific, and she was very supportive, and we put a proposal together, and it became a book of about 15 different city halls around the country. But it started with the curiosity of, I pass by this building frequently.
Yeah.
I have the time, I'm just gonna park the car and go in there and just take a look.
Yeah.
And that gasp of looking up at the rotunda, that was the inspiration for the book. If it had been some bland administrative building, it would not have happened.
Right.
It's that simple.
That's so cool to just follow your curiosity.
Yeah. And the thing about Twilight was, how many more pictures of sunsets do we need to see, right?
Well, I didn't even want to say that word because I want people to go to the show notes and click on the link and check it out.
But we have to make the distinction that sunset is one thing, twilight's another. The sun has to set first before you can have twilight.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that.
Oh, yeah. So twilight occurs when the sun is below the horizon.
Oh,
and there are different twilights too. There's the twilight that happens just after sunset. See, I learned all this from doing the book.
Yeah.
But there's the twilight most people think of the twilight that occurs just after sunset, where you get those beautiful colors in the sky, but the sun ain't around. It's below the horizon. And then there's nautical twilight, and then there's dusk. Dusk, technically, is different than twilight. Dusk is the tail end of twilight before the sky goes black.
Ah.
Yeah. So there's that.
Wow.
Yeah.
These are great. So there's the stages.
Yeah.
I mean, this is cool because no one ever talks about this. I don't think people know the difference between dusk and twilight.
Right. And I didn't either until I did the book.
It goes sunset.
Sunset, then twilight.
Twilight.
Then there's something called nautical twilight.
And what is that?
I think, don't quote me, but even though we're talking, I think it has something to do with when it's dark enough for the stars to come out so that they can navigate if they need to, something like that.
Interesting, yeah, because
something
you get
like
a couple up there. Yeah.
I think.
Okay.
And then there's dusk, which is, the sky is that really super dark blue before it goes black.
Yeah.
And then, there's something that photographers, as a side note, especially architectural photographers, which when I'm photographing buildings, I consider myself an architectural photographer. There's something called blue hour, which is, again, after the sun sets and the sky turns a certain kind of, twilight blue that doesn't happen at any other time of day, and it's just gorgeous. There's twilight blue. And that's when a lot of architectural photographers will photograph because it's still light enough out where
Yeah.
you can see stuff, but it's also dark enough where you want to put the lights on in the building. So you get these gorgeous interior lighting of a house or a building,
Yeah.
and you still get that incredible light twilight blue color. And it's called blue hour. It's a photographic term.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we are on
Yeah.
a planet spinning around and we experience this every single day. We
Right.
all see this every single day. And I would be surprised if most people know what these things are.
Yeah.
You know, we know sunset.
But I have to tell you, again, I
Amazing.
mentioned how I pursue my curiosity and photographically. So when it came to Twilight, I started photographing in a very literal way, like in sharp focus after the sunset, here it is.
Yeah.
And then after doing this 1 or 2 evenings, I said, who cares? Really? Who cares? You can see this just looking out the window.
Right.
So one night I decided, I'm just going to go the other way, and with my telephoto lens, go from sharp focus, just completely soft focus, out of focus.
Huh.
And that was one of the most profound aha moments I have ever had in my life, let alone as a photographer. And I think you and your art to lifers would appreciate this as visual artists. I viscerally, looking through the lens,
Yeah.
going soft focus,
Yeah.
and seeing clouds and the sky, the blue sky, whatever colors were going on after sunset, go from, cloud shapes into, as I was turning the lens to go soft focus, to see those clouds become abstract bands of color.
Wow.
Honestly, the way I describe it, I felt like I crossed over into a realm of color and light that was always there, but I never knew it until that moment.
Wow. Wow.
And again, that was the aha moment. It was the equivalent of looking up at the dome, the rotunda in San Francisco. It was like a gas moment. It's like I found it, and that moment, that was it. And I was off to the races. And the Twilight book was the result at the end of a 2 or 3 year process of photographing Twilight in this soft focus way.
Yeah.
And it was such a revelation.
Yeah.
And the whole process of putting that book together is, whatever book I'm doing, every photograph has to be solid on its own, and it has to work with the other photographs that are in the book.
Yeah.
And each one has to be different and great and work together. So the more you work on it, the tougher it gets to make the cut.
Right. Right.
And
right.
there's that editing process.
Yeah.
And I just learned a lot about like what makes a good Twilight, what is a boring Twilight. I could tell at 5 o'clock in the afternoon if it was going to be a good Twilight, and that would be at least an hour before the sunset.
What makes it good? How do you know
For me,
one's setting up?
Right. Okay. So for me, what I found made a great Twilight to photograph in that soft focus way was I needed the horizon to be clear, no cloud bank or fog or overcast at the horizon. I needed a clean horizon, and then I needed clouds above it that were almost in some ways stacked, but not jammed together, because I needed the blue to come through.
Yes.
So that when you go soft focus, you get those bands of color where it'd be like orange, then a blue, then a peach, then a darker blue, because as you look higher, it gets darker.
Right.
So it's that whole thing. If it was a clear night, I knew it was going to be boring, because a clear night, sunset, twilight, you're going to get beautiful orange at the horizon, and you're going to get a nice blue. But to me, you've seen one of those, you've seen them all. But when you get those clean horizon with clouds intermittent in the sky above that, then you're off to the races. And I think my best night, so to speak, would have been when I got 4 completely different twilight shots in the space of 30 or 40 minutes.
Wow, it changed
that was the
much.
best. It changed that much.
Wow.
If I was lucky, I could get 1, maybe 2. And then sometimes weeks would go by with nothing up at Sea Ranch.
God, that's
Nothing.
nuts.
But, it's just, when you're working with creation, you got, it's a collaboration.
It strikes me that this project, the Twilight project, where you're photographing something, but all of a sudden you stepped into the realm of you're the creator here massively. I mean, you're riffing off of the sky, but you're doing, it's like me painting it or something. You are not, and I know cropping and you're capturing photographs from life and you're composing and you are making it, but there's something about this process that was radically different for you.
It was radically different, but something? When people saw the work, they go, oh, if I had $1 for every time someone said, these look like Rothko's, I used to joke, I could buy a Rothko painting. But, as much as I admired Rothko, it wasn't like I was consciously looking to imitate him in any way.
Right.
But I will say this, as a result of, while I was working on it, I investigated Rothko a little more deeply. And what I came away with was just deep admiration for his commitment to color and the idea of communicating emotion through pure color and abstraction.
Right.
That's pretty profound.
It's interesting, right? Like you do this work, you find your way into something and you notice something and you take a picture and then you're into this thing and then people reflect back to you and they say things and then that drives you to go look up Rothko and learn about, like, you weren't emulating, in fact, you probably weren't even thinking of him, but everyone else does. So what is the connection there? And I love that that's also part of your journey. Your curiosity leads you into learning new things, but then all the reflection back. That's really interesting what people say,
Yes, and it made me appreciate Rothko all the more.
Yeah.
And also, it made me appreciate, honestly, not just Rothko, but painters like you and other visual artists. Because as a photographer, I'm capturing transitions.
Yeah.
As painters, visual artists, you're creating those transitions from color to color.
Right.
I'm in awe of that.
Right.
I'm capturing it with a camera.
Yeah.
That's different.
Yeah.
When you're working on a canvas or a piece of wood or whatever you're working on there, you're creating that.
Yeah.
And there's something, I'm in awe of that, quite frankly. I really am.
It's when you say following curiosity, like, I'm looking for things in this that it's weird. It's like, it's familiar. Like, I've seen them before and it's like, oh, but that's different. But I know where this is. At a certain point, I start to understand more what this is going to become. It's like you forecasting the Twilight. I can kind of see it's setting up to be like, but I have no idea what it's going to be. All I have to do is just start, as I did today. I'm just curious and I'm just listening and I'm paying, but it's sort of this paying attention thing, kind of paying attention and kind of not.
Yeah.
Which is a whole nother podcast.
But, hearing you say what you just said, I flashed on this whole thing of, when I start on a project, again, it sparks with curiosity and being open to being curious about things.
Yeah.
And then once you're working on it for a while, it starts talking back to you about what it is and what it needs and what it really is going to become.
I love that process.
So do I.
Yeah.
I mean, it really makes you think. It's a very organic thing.
Yes.
And maybe there's something quasi-spiritual about it. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can't know what to do until you get to this point, and then you get to this point, and then you got to wait around and figure it out, and then you make a decision, then you make another decision, and then you're just being led. Right. Just being led by your nose down this journey.
But once you know, you know. At least that's been my experience. Where again, working on something, it's a little bit of this, and then maybe you had some preconceived notion about maybe I should be doing this, and then you do a little bit of that, and it's like, wait a minute, that's not exactly how I thought it would be.
Right.
Okay, so we, and the idea is don't be discouraged. You tried it, it didn't work, let it go, and that allows something else to come through.
Right. So
and follow
I
that.
want to, before we close here, I want to touch on your most recent project because it's the Golden Gate Bridge, you guys. You know, it's the most iconic thing, which I wouldn't, it's like me trying to do a painting of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Right.
There's no way it can't look like a painting of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Right.
But you took it on.
But that was my challenge.
Yeah, I know. You took it on.
Yes.
Give us just a little hint on this. It's mostly black and white.
It
right?
is black and white, which was one of the things. Yeah. Live in the Bay Area. I love the Golden Gate Bridge. And, when I would tell people like, working on this project about the Golden Gate Bridge, I could feel the eye rolls. Like, do we really need to see another photo of the Golden Gate Bridge?
It's going to sell great at Ghirardelli Square.
Yes, exactly. But, my attitude was, my feeling about, being a photographer is I want to make the familiar new again.
Sure.
See the familiar anew.
Yes, yes.
And
Beautiful.
what better structure?
I mean,
what better icon than the Golden Gate Bridge?
Yes, right.
And literally one day I was driving into the city and I said, I love this bridge. Is there a way to see it differently?
Oh, God,
and
that's great.
I took it on as a self-imposed challenge.
Jeez.
And I gave myself 3 rules. 1, no postcard shots. If you want to see a postcard shot of the Golden Gate Bridge, you can buy one or you can go online. You can do a Google search of like fun things to do in San Francisco. And on that homepage, you'll see a classic color photo of the Golden Gate Bridge, which then led me to, I'm going to shoot black and white, not color. Because the thing is, when you see a color photograph of the Golden Gate Bridge, you're visually numb to it because it is so familiar.
Yeah, that red. Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as you see the bridge, done it. Been there, seen it, done it, don't need to see it again. But when it's in black and white, one of the beauties of black and white photography, it reduces everything to its essence. It's shadow, it's light, it's shape, it's texture, it's the essence. And it makes the viewer work a little harder.
Yeah.
And with something like the Golden Gate Bridge, I think that's a good thing to do. And the other thing too was, which is related to the first thing, like no postcard shots, is I wanted to photograph from unusual vantage points to generally put the bridge in context with its environment.
Yeah.
And basically what it came down to was I wanted to make photographs of the Golden Gate Bridge I've never seen before. And I worked on it for 2 to 3 years. And on the bridge, around the bridge, it's 36 views. I feel like I did a 360 of the Golden Gate Bridge. But to me, it was very important that I would make photographs that have, it sounds kind of bold to say it, but I don't think people have seen the photographs of the Golden Gate Bridge from these vantage points and in black and white. And so
what was you get into this project, what surprised you?
What surprised me? That I could do it, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Because the whole 36 views comes from Hokusai's 36 views of Mount Fuji.
Oh,
these woodblock prints that he made in the 1830s. And everyone has seen them. The most famous one is the big tidal wave with Mount Fuji. So that's the big one. It's called the Big Wave.
And that's interesting because it's almost like where's whatever that game is, where's
Waldo?
Where's Waldo? But you kind of look and it's like, oh, there it is, over there.
But it was an exercise. To me, it was this self-imposed exercise in seeing. Like, take something that everybody knows, and is there a way to see it differently? It really was a challenge. So I guess when you ask what surprised me the most was the fact that I think I achieved it.
That's so cool.
Because I know in my gut, if it wasn't working, I just would have said.
Yeah, it's like when you started taking the sunset Twilight pictures that were just boring.
Exactly.
There's nothing worse than just being bored by your own things.
Right.
I mean, I do that. I make paintings and it's like, it is the worst. It's like, I just got to cover them up or just, I have to change it. You just don't want it out there.
I agree.
It does more damage to you
than
anybody.
Listen,
so I get it.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like, when you say the worst, it's almost like, you don't even want to admit that you did that.
Yeah. Because we have all these high, hopes for ourselves that we're going to show the world a different perspective.
Exactly.
And it's like, I just did a postcard under the bridge.
Right.
Yeah.
So Yeah. So the book is self-published, and it comes out officially in January, but I'll have copies on hand in this month, December.
Okay.
And
Cool.
you know, the only orange in the book is the cover.
Which is great.
It's cloth bound
Uh-huh.
with orange colored fabric.
beautiful
And then
book.
there are occasional accent pages that are the international orange of the bridge. So we do have the color of the bridge in there, but it's more a design element as opposed to in a photograph.
Yes.
So-
And that color, I'm sure you know this,
Yeah.
that was the primer color
Yeah.
for the bridge. And when they painted it, primed it, everyone loved it.
Yes.
And
That's basically
I think
it.
that's just the greatest
Yeah. In fact, I had
example of find your way as you go.
Yes.
You know.
I know, because everybody else had ideas about what color the bridge should be. And the architect of the bridge decided, wait a minute, this primer color works great with the environment, with the marin headlands. Everybody can see it. You know, no ships are going to crash into this, even with fog.
And it's
you know?
gorgeous. It's like,
Yeah.
that actually is one of my favorite colors.
It is one of my favorite colors
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
It really is.
yeah.
So,
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so as we wrap here,
Mm-hmm.
what's where are you going next? I know the book's coming and you
Right.
put a lot of attention on that, but that's
Mm-hmm.
probably not what's tempting your curiosity
Right.
next. I'm just
So-
curious.
so what I'm doing now, I'm glad you asked, because I am excited about this new project.
You're always excited about it. That's the one thing.
Well, I have to say, after the Golden Gate Bridge, I was a little, I may have mentioned this to you privately. It's like, this is like the first time in nearly 20 years where I don't have an immediate book project to go to. Ooh, what am I going to do? So, but I figured, just trust that it'll happen, because all book projects came about as a result of being open and curious. So what I've started doing, like in the last few weeks, and I'm so excited about this, it's like I can't wait to get back to it, which is, and again, this might spark an eye roll.
A book on top elves.
No.
Is it?
No.
Okay.
But it has to do with reflections in windows. But again, I know some people out there might be going, whatever, but it's a little bit different. And I think as painters, you will appreciate my approach to this, which is, it's not just seeing something reflected in a window and just seeing it in the window as if the window was a canvas and you're seeing what's ever
Right.
reflected in it. It's also what's behind the window and how what's ever behind the window.
Oh, it's that beautiful in between.
Correct.
In between. It's the Twilight in between.
Right. So
Yeah.
let's just say it's a clothing store. And actually, one of the shots that I took was on Haight Street, Haight-Ashbury.
Oh, wow.
And it was one of these clothing stores that has all this vintage clothing. And there was a mannequin with like this lime green wig and this reflective dress.
Yeah.
And she had some kind of a scarf or something with all these different colors. And across the street was these typical San Francisco wooden homes, like
Right,
Victorian
right,
kind of
right.
homes. So I photographed the window, and these homes from across the street are reflected in the window. And she, the mannequin, is like kind of over the houses with with the colors, onto the houses.
Yeah.
It's just like
It's
this.
interesting. It's like I'm thinking of like kind of the Photoshop, the layering that we get so much because
Yes.
technology allows us to do all these blends.
But this is
of
in
everything. But
this is in camera,
situ. Yeah.
in camera, in the street, and that's what I'm going for. In fact, if I ever put a book together of this work, I would have to say in an introduction, this was not Photoshop. This was not AI.
Yeah.
This was actually in the street, looking at something reflected in the window and photographed in concert with what's behind the window.
Yeah.
And I went
It's
to
interesting.
Chinatown. And Chinatown is just great because the streets are so narrow.
Yeah.
And all the things hanging in the windows. And one of my favorite shots was of a fire escape that was reflected from across the street into a window. And inside the window was like this dangling fish, this very colorful
Wow.
paper fish.
Oh, yeah.
And the juxtaposition of a fire escape and this ascending fish,
Yeah. How cool.
And one of my inspirations was the painter Stuart Davis,
Oh, and interesting.
because I love his work
Huh.
and the way he would layer, elements of architecture,
Right.
and
Pieces.
and
yeah.
typeface,
Yes.
and
yes.
words,
Yes.
and kind of merge them together. That's he's like, again, the way Elliot Erwitt was my North Star for the
Right.
convention book. Stuart Davis, in his way,
that's so cool.
is something of my North Star here.
Wow. Great.
It's almost, and I've described it as I'm painting with a camera.
Yeah.
And since
Yes.
I'm not a painter, I just feel like this is as close as I can get to painting with a camera, along with the Twilight work. That to me was
what's
painting with a camera.
interesting, and you've probably thought about this, but there's what's also interesting about the differences that you're setting up is you have this reflection, which is in your face, external, but then you have the internal. So there's this internal, external. There's the behind the scenes, the secret world, and then the out in the street and the busy cars, and and I just think that's a really beautiful juxtaposition that's just there for the taking.
It is there for the taking, and along with what you just said, when I'm making these kinds of photographs, and by the way, it's all iPhone. I'm not even using a 35.
Oh, that's so cool.
It's all iPhone, because I find I get a certain kind of depth of field with the iPhone that comes natural, that I don't get with the heavy artillery, as I call it, because the heavy artillery wants to focus on something.
Yeah.
But the iPhone is a lot more liberal that way.
Interesting.
Interesting. But to your earlier point, when I'm doing this kind of reflection photography, people are passing me by in the street, and I'm saying to myself, do you not see what's going on here? This is available for everybody to see, and no one's getting it but me.
Yeah.
And maybe that's my job.
Well, that's
is
your
to
job.
get it.
That's your job. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Arthur, listen, thank you so much for coming in and firing us all up. It's just, I love it. It's like the way you are, and the curiosity, and just following that and documenting it. And it's like, you're walking in the world, and behind you are these books that we can go look at to figure out where you've been. And it's just really, really inspiring.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And you guys, we have in the show notes, there's links to Arthur's website, all his books, and all his contact information. You can follow him on Instagram. And listen, thanks so much for being here, you guys. I really appreciate you. And don't forget that you too are a work of art. All right, you guys, we'll see you next week on the Art to Life podcast. Bye, everyone.